Welcome to another edition of Crisis Communications in Sports, where we break down the communication breakdowns in the sports world. Now, from BRCG Sports, here's marketing veteran Jim Rocco and Crisis Communications strategist Isaac Benjamin.
Welcome to a special edition of Crisis Communications in Sports. I'm Jim Rocco, my co-host is Isaac Benjamin, and our producer is Alex Baldonado. Now, the reason I said special is because initially we were not planning on releasing a new episode during Thanksgiving week. But as we all know, especially in 2020, certain things can pop up that just demand your immediate attention. And that is indeed the case for us right now, because one of our own, a fellow sports PR professional named Amy Palcic, was, by our estimation, done a great disservice, to say the very least, by her now former employer, the Houston Texans, and we want to share her story with you. And here's the best part. We've got an absolutely phenomenal guest coming up next to help enlighten us about Amy's situation. And that is none other than legendary NFL insider Peter King. Before we get to Peter, just want to talk to you a little bit about another story in the NFL that's going on right now. If you're in New York, you certainly notice this, and probably elsewhere as well. The New York Giants head coach, Joe Judge, mid-season just fired the offensive line coach, Marc Colombo. A little bit odd in and of itself to fire a coach like that mid-season. However, the bigger story was that the initial rumor that was going about was that there was also a physical altercation that preceded the firing. And it even went so far as to say that Colombo, a rather large man, got the best of Judge and did some damage. The Giants immediately shot that down. They said it's completely false, and most of the mainstream media accepted them at their word for that. However, as you can imagine, the rumor mill just kept going, and a lot of the naysayers said, hey, there's nothing that's telling us you did or you didn't. We're just taking your word for it. But I think there could be a physical altercation involved here. I think that actually happened. Isaac, what are your thoughts on how the Giants handled it and if they could have done something different?
So I'm a Patriots fan, so I am loath to ever compliment the G-men. But
this is a former Patriots coach.
Yeah,
Joe Judge.
Both of them. They did exactly what you need to do. I mean, yeah. Let's peel it back a little bit. One reporter who's an opinion guy for Fox Sports isn't a beat reporter, doesn't go around breaking news.
Correct.
Puts out this tweet. Over the next day, it's refuted by every beat reporter who spends their days in the Giants locker room. You know, what's interesting is when I first heard about this, right, where there's a story, but there's a much juicier story making the rounds, I immediately thought back to the situation a couple of years ago at the Cleveland Cavaliers where J.R. Smith got in an argument with an assistant coach and threw a bowl of soup.
I remember that.
And that was really making the rounds on social media. You know, what kind of was it? Was there a matzo ball involved? Was it minestrone? It really was going deep. It was in the doldrums, the late end of the season, and that was a very big story. So I looked up the statement that the Cavaliers put out, and it was two sentences. Cavaliers guard J.R. Smith has been suspended by the team for one game for detrimental conduct. He will serve the suspension tonight as the Cavaliers host the Philadelphia 76ers at Quicken Loans Arena in Cleveland. Now, what's important there is they laid out the facts. They knew folks were going back and forth about what was, but the reality is for them, the rumor didn't have to be substantiated. And when you're dealing with this for another brand, you have to find out where the rumor came about, whether it's true or not, that's most of all, and then how it reflects on the larger end game that you're looking for. So in this case, the Giants put out a very, very similar statement. It was 4 sentences. The Giants have made a bye-week change on their coaching staff, replacing offensive line Marc Colombo, Dave
DeGuglielmo. Don't worry, I'll help you with those long Italian names.
Yeah. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And then Joe Judge said, we appreciate what Marc has done, but I felt like this move is in the best interest for the team. Not acknowledging the color that's making this entire story, just putting it out there. And then they deployed all of their sources who said, I've checked with everybody involved. There was not a fist fight. I don't think you need to make it a bigger story than it is. I don't think you need to make it part of what the team is addressing. Just say, this is what happened. This is what's happening in the future. This is what you should care about. And because they wanted to make sure that nobody thought their head coach was getting in a fight, they sent out team reps to tell all their sources and to check with their sources in the locker room there was no fight.
Here's another thing that would have helped them an awful lot, and that they didn't do that I wish they had as a Giants fan. We haven't seen Joe Judge since this happened. He put out that statement, acknowledging that he made that coaching change. He has not been in front of a camera. We have not seen his either marked or unmarked face. And let's face it, even the biggest conspiracy theorist, if they saw Joe Judge looking completely fine, would have to admit, oh, I guess it was just a rumor. It's not true. And okay, they have a bye week this week, so I guess he wouldn't ordinarily be in front of the camera right now, but they could have saved themselves a lot of trouble by going that route.
I don't think there's trouble. I mean, the number one thing you have to do here is think about what the source of this rumor is.
Well, see, you and I know that it's not like a regular beat writer, but in the court of public opinion, they're just hearing that the
Yeah, but
salacious part that there was a fight. They don't care who told them.
sure, but if you look at the Cavaliers 2 years ago, that argument and the infamous bowl of soup, the most famous bowl of soup since Seinfeld, that happened, right? It's since been confirmed by the assistant coach. So there is where you have to work a little bit differently. But in this situation, when it's not true, and the only person saying it's true is a dubious opinion columnist who also, by the way, has been on the record saying, I was asked by every radio show in New York to come on and talk about my sources. I don't need to do that. I don't think they need to really be concerned. I mean, they know that all their reporters are putting it out. This is not true. And what's really interesting and what I think does the dirty work for them, there are other Fox Sports personalities who are clapping back at this and saying this isn't happening. Let that be a drama with Fox Sports. The Giants don't care about that. The Giants didn't have a fight in their locker room, and everybody who covers the Giants knows that. And I think this is one of those situations where it might be fun down the road to be like, oh, remember where there was that rumor about a fight with the Giants? And I think that's all it is.
Our guest today is Peter King. Peter is one of the most highly regarded NFL insiders on the scene today. Peter wrote for Sports Illustrated for 29 years, and he currently publishes his long-read column titled Football Morning in America on NBCSports.com, and he's been named National Sports Writer of the Year 3 times. We spoke to Peter about the dysfunction that has been prevalent within the Houston Texans organization and how that led to the firing of their Vice President of Communications, Amy Palcic. Peter King, welcome to Crisis Communications in Sports. Appreciate you being here with us today.
Hey, no problem, Jim. We'll enjoy it. We'll have a good time.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we wanted to talk to you a little bit about our colleague, essentially, who was with the Houston Texans. That's Amy Palcic. She was their head of PR and was unceremoniously fired recently. But in order to really give that its just due, we need to backtrack a little bit. So if you'll bear with me, I want to set up and talk to you about what's been going on with the Texans, and you could give us your take on that as well. So 2 years ago, the original owner of the Texans, Bob McNair, passed away, and his son Cal took over the day-to-day operations. Shortly into his tenure doing that, they fired the GM, Brian Gain. Then at some point after that, about a year later, well, when they did that, Bill O'Brien, the head coach, we should say, assumed the responsibilities of the GM role. So he was a dual head coach and GM. Go back to about a month and a half ago, they let O'Brien go. Partly, because some of the decisions he made as GM, essentially, some not so great trade, getting rid of DeAndre Hopkins hurt him a lot. And then that sort of led people to realize that it seemed like there was something going on with the Texans that was a little bit out of the ordinary. One of the central characters in this narrative is a guy named Jack Easterby, who has been banging around the NFL for about 10 years, essentially started as a chaplain with the Chiefs, was called a character coach with the Patriots, and was very highly regarded, has since taken on a very senior role with the Texans, and is even the interim GM now, and is making football personnel decisions, which strikes a lot of people as very odd. So my first question to you is, what's going on down in Houston? What's happening with the Texans right now?
Well, basically, when the elder McNair died, when Bob McNair died, he is a commanding presence. He is the person who is responsible for the Texans being in Houston. He's a very wealthy man. And when he died, I think the Texans lost their North Star. And very active in political causes throughout the state of Texas. But so Cal McNair, who was always around the team, but he wasn't like for instance, in Kansas City, when Lamar Hunt died, his son Clark Hunt was had been very much involved in the business and just sort of had a very easy transition into the ownership of the team. Whereas Cal McNair, he's a quieter guy. He's does not seek the headlines in any way, and so I think it's a little bit harder for him to just sort of seamlessly go into the role that his dad had. So he was more comfortable allowing the most commanding presence in the organization, who was Bill O'Brien, to take the lead on things. And it was easy for the Texans to hand Bill O'Brien control of the organization because that was his personality as a coach and as an overall boss.
Right.
But when the performance of the team wasn't there, when a couple of the trades, including the trade this offseason, getting rid of DeAndre Hopkins for very little in return, kind of blew up in their face, and they were 0-4, they decided that they had to get rid of him. So they got rid of him, and at that point, I think Jack Easterby's role in the organization has been widely misunderstood. He doesn't want to be the general manager of this team. He doesn't want to be, let's say, the COO who's going to hire and fire people. What he wants to be is someone who works with a group of people. This past summer, Jim, I did a story for NBCSports.com on a day in the life of an NFL team during COVID. Okay. And I did the Houston Texans. I didn't know Jack Easterby at the time, but I saw him in action virtually and over FaceTime and things like that for much of a day. I watched him do his job for, I'd say, maybe 2+ hours during the day. So one of the things that I learned about him is that he is a kind of a facilitator. And I think one of the biggest problems with this is that people who were in New England who thought that Jack Easterby, when he worked for Bill Belichick, because Belichick promotes the don't tell anybody what you're doing and keep everything undercover. Nobody even knew what this guy did in New England. And then he went to Houston. It was kind of the same thing. He never dealt with the press. He never talked to them. He was just a guy with some authority who nobody knew. And I have since gotten to know him. And several times I've said to him, Jack, you gotta talk to people out in public. You have to explain to people who you are, what you do, what you're about. Because I think everybody ascribes nefarious means to Jack Easterby. And I'm not in the building, but
Right.
that's not my understanding of how this all is working.
Okay.
But the one last thing I would say is everybody inside the Texans basically, is walking on eggshells now because nobody really knows who's in control of their fate.
Right. So he's sort of been like a lightning rod. And to your point,
Right.
maybe it's a bit unfair because it wasn't the case that he was actually seeking more power within the organization. It's just that Cal McNair trusts him and
Right.
sort of felt like until we could right the ship probably next season.
I think I think you're putting it almost exactly the way it is,
Gotcha.
Jim. Yeah.
Okay.
And you know what comes to mind? This might be a little too inside football, but we're here with Peter King. It sounds like he had a role coming from a Patriots fan very similar to Ernie Adams.
Right.
Where you do whatever you want, and here in New England, we'll respect the process.
And then he goes to the Texans where that's not flying. And maybe that explains why he tried to bring in Casario, who would understand how he can float between departments, and sort of be like, it's fine, I can trust him. And when you get into that vacuum without any leadership that understands your role, I guess that's how you're elevated.
Yeah, here's the thing, Isaac. I think Bill Belichick likes the fact that, for 10 years, the first 10 years of the Patriots' reign, 9 years, nobody really knew who Scott Pioli was either, and he was the de facto general manager.
Right.
And nobody knew who Ernie Adams was. Honestly, the first time most people ever heard Ernie Adams speak was on one of the post Super Bowl NFL Films shows called
That's
Do
me.
Your Job,
Yep.
in which Ernie Adams explained how they did things and what they were doing, especially as it related. This was in the Seattle Super Bowl, how they were going to defend Michael Bennett, who at the time was a dominant defensive player for the Seahawks. That's the first time anybody knew him. And so similarly, Jack Easterby never one time, I don't know how long he was in New England, let's say 3 years, but he never one time in New England had a conversation of any sort with a media person, because that is not what Bill wanted him to do. So I think you're right about that. I think that he has worked in two organizations that believe that people like Jack Easterby should be seen and not heard.
Now here's where the narrative gets a little crazy, because a little more than a month after O'Brien is fired, we have this very strange firing of Amy Palcic, who was, by all accounts, an extremely popular and very competent PR professional. In fact, the only woman to be fronting and controlling a PR group for an NFL team. She won the 2017 Pete Rozelle Award for her work. So the reason that was given at the time, this was November 11th, was that she no longer fit within the culture. And it appeared to most people who were looking at this that it may have been her political leanings on a personal level. And it didn't seem to me that it was anything very extreme. She might have just acknowledged that she was, proud that there was a female vice president and things of that nature. Now, people were drawing the dots, right? Connecting the dots and figuring, well, the McNairs have been known to be more of a right-leaning organization in the South. And now there's this guy named Jack Easterby who started as a chaplain, and people were making assumptions. What is it that all of a sudden, as far as you know, made her not a culture fit with the Texans?
I mean, I think there's a couple of things that happened, Jim. Number one, right after the election, Amy, first of all, let me go back and tell you that one of the things that Amy did this past year is she made sure that all of the players on the Texans, she would work with all of them who were involved either in the Black Lives Matter cause or simply in let's get out the vote. Mm-hmm. She was involved in the really enthusiastic acceptance of all the players in the locker room to get registered to vote. She had some, maybe all of the members of her PR staff trained to be volunteers at polling places, around Houston or maybe in just one place. But she was very active in that way. And is that why? And she also really celebrated the Kamala Harris thing for, hey, look, now very often when people say, if you see it, you can be it. And mm-hmm. Now I think she was just celebrating the fact that, okay, Hillary Clinton lost. Whatever party she was in, she lost 4 years ago. And now we have a vice president who's a woman and also a woman of color who has made it. And so Amy was very out front celebrating that. So when she got fired, I asked someone who I knew in the organization, I said, level with me. Was Amy a political being inside your organization. I know the McNairs. They are a very Republican family. So was Amy an activist anyway? And this person said to me, I never one time heard Amy talk about the election or politics or anything like that, other than to work with players to say, hey, let's get out and vote. Everybody needs to vote. We need to start exercising our constitutional rights. So I don't know the answer, Jim, about the cultural fit thing. And I'm like everybody else. I think that maybe it did have something to do with her politics. But again, that is speculation. And I don't know the answer to it. Did the Texans want somebody who thought more like they did? I can't answer that question.
So what's interesting to me about this whole situation is that, and you notably on Twitter clapped back because you wrote a lot about Amy in your column 2 weeks ago, and somebody said, well, why aren't you talking about Jack Easterby? And you said, well, it wasn't Jack Easterby who fired her, right? It was Jamie Roots.
It was Jamie Roots, the club president, yeah. That's where the real conflict is, because I asked Jack Easterby after this. He wanted very clearly, because I have gotten to know him a little bit, he wanted very clearly me to know that this was not my call. I don't make decisions like this. I don't fire vice presidents. I don't fire people. That's not what I do inside this organization. But anyway, Isaac, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
So the question is, if it's about team fit, Jamie Roots has been with the Texans for many, many years. He hired Amy way back when. The only thing that's changed about team culture since Amy has, risen up with all of her work with J.J. Watt after the hurricane there, the only thing that's changed was a month ago, Easterby took on, even if you want to call it a nominal title, took on a new title. Is there a sense on what culture is different now and what that culture is trying to be?
The only sense that I have is that I think, as somebody in the organization there told me, I think they want everybody in this organization to be on the same page. Now, you can draw a lot of conclusions from that. What does that mean? Look, all I can say is I've known Amy Palcic since she worked for the Cleveland Browns in the early 2000s. And my experience with her is that in a very divided organization in Cleveland, she was the glue. She absolutely was the glue. She, worked with the coaches and the players, and when you're a PR person in the NFL at a very high level, it's an emotional, tempestuous business where tempers get raised, where there are arguments and sometimes even physical altercations. And it's up to the public relations person at the head of the football operations. I'm not saying to bury it, but to bury it, Yeah. And honestly, one of the reasons, the reason I have such respect for Amy is that I believe that never once did she lie to me. She might say, Peter, I can't talk to you about that. But never one time did she say, yeah, Bill O'Brien, he's a wonderful coach and he's this, and this. Amy really did like Bill O'Brien, the former head coach, but Amy understood the boundary lines. I'm in the media. She can help me and has helped me many times to do stories, but she also realized that I had a line and that she had a line. And she was very good about not crossing those lines. And that's why if you tell me that she's not a cultural fit and she can't fit in our organization, I'm just telling you, I would strongly advise people to be very careful about working for that organization, because I just look, I think that I am a pragmatist, but I'm also a someone who has a conscience. And I think that Amy Palcic, to say that uh, there's anything other than whatever sort of personality conflicts or whatever, I just think is a scar on her that doesn't deserve to be there.
Yeah, well, obviously we agree, and that you actually touch on something that was something we wanted to ask you about. Going forward, do you think this is something that's going to deter a new potential head coaching candidate or GM candidate? Is someone going to say, listen, whoever is to blame, whether it's Jack Easterby or Cal McNair or Jamie Roots, I'm not going to be comfortable there?
Look, the Houston Texans have something that every head coaching candidate wants above all other things, and that is a really good quarterback in Deshaun Watson. And you can overlook a lot of things if you've got Deshaun Watson on your team. You've got they've been stripped of a lot of draft choices because of bad trades. Well, the Laramie Tunsil trade actually was it was arguable whether it was good or not. But you can put up with a lot of things. But as I have written and I have said, if you are a prominent head coaching candidate and you have more than one choice, even with Deshaun Watson, it'd be pretty hard to go to work for the Houston Texans right now at this point in time. And that's why it is so important that they get the right general manager on their team and that they hire a VP of communications, director of public relations, whatever you call it, that that you can work with and work with well.
This issue, and it's ironic, and I think that we appreciate you contextualizing it, because typically a team firing their PR person would never become a PR crisis. Right. And yet it has evolved into
people don't care. People don't care.
And we say that as a proud PR flack. We you don't want to know about us. And the crazy thing here that's confusing me is, if we're saying that Jack Easterby has nothing to do with football decisions, so I understand.
Let me stop you for a second.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right now he does, because the two general managers, or one general manager since he got there, is gone, and the head coach who was running everything is gone. So he has to have some run of the football side of the building, but they also have good scouts and personnel people who weigh in on things like this now. So it's not Jack Easterby in total, but clearly his role has changed. But I can just tell you this: he is not going to be the general manager of this team. Even if he stays employed by the Texans, it will be in some sort of support role, not an out front role.
But my question was, as that being the answer that they're giving, and McNair gave a press conference last week affirming that this wasn't a football decision. And as we've talked about, there's this vacuum of leadership, ironically, between Easterby, who's a Svengali at forming, team leadership, and Roots, who just wrote a book on leadership. There's an absence of leadership that sometimes comes from a PR professional saying, you can't do this right now. Yeah. It looks really bad if you fire somebody 4 days after they tweet celebrating that girls can now see themselves in the White House, and then you fire somebody.
I agree totally. And that's why, the irony of this is so rich. Jamie Roots writes a book about leadership, and he's going to do interviews about, how to be a leader in business today. And he does all this. And yet at the same time, he's got a gigantic controversy about leadership on his hands that is just that's really plaguing his organization. So I think the whole thing is this is not just a half hour or 40-minute podcast subject. This should be studied in business school.
Well, so that actually brings me to the next part of it, right? That exact issue. The NFL has to see this as more than just an interesting conversation Thanksgiving week, right? Texans fans, of course, are very aware of what's going on. And I always say, I probably say it on every episode, there's 3 truths. And my girlfriend taught me this when we argued. There's your truth, there's my truth, and the truth. And they don't all have to agree. If there's a narrative out there that Easterby is a Rasputin type character who's, floating in the back and creating this palace intrigue, mixed with a undeniable leadership vacuum at the top of a football team, how does the NFL see what's going on with Cal McNair, and how does New York? What is New York worrying about?
My understanding of this is that most of the time the NFL is not going to get involved in these things. They might say to a team, hey, do you need some help? Do you want our help? Do you want our advice? Do you want us to help you run a search for either a GM or a director of football operations or something like that? But if the organization, look, Daniel Snyder still owns the Washington football team. If anybody was ever going to get shown the door, it would have been Daniel Snyder. Basically, the Houston Texans' little intramural squabble does not rise to something that Roger Goodell would deem as anything more than sort of a little fly speck on the league. Even though the thing the NFL is doing more than it ever has before is trying to get women involved, both in management, in coaching. They're pushing hard for flag football, for involvement of girls to play football. So this is the next frontier for the NFL, the next big frontier. I just wrote in my column last week that, speculating after the Miami Marlins hired Kim Ang as the first woman general manager of a Major League Baseball team, could the NFL be far behind? And I think right now there's somebody who works in the league office who is the right-hand person right now of the COVID-related operations in the league, because she's worked for several teams and knows so many people in the league so well. I think Donna Ponte, I'm not saying she should be a general manager, but boy, people should talk to her. She's incredibly bright. But anyway, the NFL only would be concerned about this not because the Texans look like rank amateurs, but because they fired a woman who did nothing wrong. That's the issue here.
And who has now retained an attorney. So if they weren't paying it enough attention, they will be.
Yeah. In other words, when I read that, and I don't know what Amy's deal is or anything like that, I just said, probably their first offer at a settlement or whatever was pretty cheap. And so, why not just go get an attorney and tell them you're serious? But again, who knows? We'll see where that goes.
Peter King, we won't hold you too long. We know how busy you are. Thank you so much for your valuable time, and hope you have a great rest of the season and a terrific Thanksgiving.
Hey, thanks so much, guys. Good to be on with you. And I have to say, this is I don't think about this becomes a story for me for 3 or 4 days. And then after that, I just move on to the next one. But it's so interesting to me to ponder what you guys are pondering, because there are so many different aspects of a story that hit so many different people. And I think it's good for you guys to look into it like that.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that. And that's exactly what this is. Just sort of, noticing things like this with our work. this is something that really, really hits home, and we appreciate you shedding some light on it for us.
Yeah, we try to present it as asking some questions that experts don't always get to chew on, or don't always have an audience to talk about, and I think this encapsulates that perfectly. Thank you very much. And as a Pats fan, thank you for taking me through the past 10 years.
Okay, Isaac. Hey, no problem. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great week.
Take care.
So, Isaac, I don't know about you, but there was a lot of fascinating things that we just spoke to Peter about. But one of the things that really jumps out at me is his version of what the real deal is with Jack Easterby, because he's this now sort of mythical character that everyone has associated with, in a very negative way, saying that he's just this guy who's glomming in and trying to get to a position that he doesn't deserve. And you know, given that Peter obviously is very much in the corner of Amy Palcic, you could trust that his take on this is actually very accurate.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really fascinating that to him, who has an ear to the ground, it's not a question of Jamie Roots or Jack Easterby. It's a question of Cal McNair's ownership, and it's created a monster. And when you don't have somebody steering that monster, you can't really control where it thrashes and how it acts out. And I think that what's happening in Houston in this power vacuum is going to get a lot more national attention when inevitably other dominoes fall and other mishaps happen, and people start to connect the dots and realize this is a problem. Thanks for listening to a special Thanksgiving edition of Crisis Communications in Sports. You can find future episodes wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you listen. Please make sure to rate and review. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and from the house that Haggerty built, stay out of trouble.